Hello and welcome grade 12s to the History Crew channel. In this video, which serves as part 5.4, we will discuss the Free Mandela campaigns, the role of international trade unions as well as the frontline states during the 1980s, in increasing the international pressure on the apartheid state. These forms of international resistance plunged the apartheid state into a deeper crisis, crippling the economy of South Africa even more, as well as further isolating South Africa from the rest of the world. One focus of the anti-apartheid movements was a call for the release of political prisoners in South Africa. In 1978, Nelson Mandela, then a prisoner on Robben Island, was turning 60 years old, and this was used by anti-apartheid supporters in many countries to send petitions and letters of protest to the South African government demanding his release. A Release Nelson Mandela Committee was soon formed in London, and demands for his release spread internationally during the 1980s. Some of the strongest campaigns for his release took place when several of the world's biggest artists and musicians formed the Artists Against Apartheid, which organized a rock concert in July 1986. This rock concert was well attended by a huge crowd and assisted in spreading awareness about the injustices of apartheid. The anti-apartheid movement initiated the Freedom at 70 campaign, and another concert was held on the 11th of June 1988, in honor of Mandela's 70th birthday. This rock concert was also well attended by a huge crowd of 72,000 people, and some of the world's biggest music artists entertained the massive crowd. There were also many guest speakers, who raised awareness about the injustices of apartheid and motivated the crowd at the stadium, as well as the millions who watched on television, to take a stand against apartheid. In this way, Mandela's name became an international symbol of the struggle against apartheid. Whilst he was still imprisoned, he was given honours such as the Freedom of the City of Glasgow. A resolution was passed in the United States Congress calling for his release, and in Britain and the Netherlands, streets were named after him. His face also appeared on T-shirts and campaign posters. During the same time in the 1980s, the United Democratic Front and other organizations within South Africa were also calling for his release. Under increasing pressure from both national and international anti-apartheid groups, Botha even offered to release Mandela in 1985, provided that he agreed to renounce violence and resistance against the South African state. In a statement read out by his daughter, Mandela rejected these conditions, but his words of response were a further inspiration to the anti-apartheid movements all over the world. It was becoming very clear that for as long as the apartheid state kept Mandela and other political prisoners in jail, there would no resolution to the crisis faced by the apartheid state. International trade unions also played a major part in mobilizing the international anti-apartheid movement in many countries during the 1980s, such as Ireland, Britain, Norway and Australia. Trade unionists wanted to show solidarity with black factory and mine workers in South Africa, and one of Britain's biggest trade unions, the Trade Union Congress, called for sanctions against South Africa. Other organizations such as the International Confederation of Trade Unions called for a boycott of South African goods and trade, for disinvestment during the 1980s, and they even raised funds for anti-apartheid movements and the ANC. Whilst we've been discussing the anti-apartheid movements from mostly Europe and America thus far, we cannot forget the fact that many African countries also assisted in the fight against apartheid. The Organization of African Unity used its influence to have South Africa expelled from several organizations, such as the World Health Organization, the International Labour Organization, and the International Olympic Movement. This would further isolate South Africa from the rest of the world. The frontline states also played an important role in the struggle against the apartheid government. They were the countries in southern Africa bordering, or were close to South Africa, such as Angola, Botswana, Mozambique, Zambia, Zimbabwe and Tanzania. In 1980, they formed the Southern African Development Coordination Conference. The aim of this was to promote economic development in the region and to reduce their economic dependence on South Africa. This would mean that South Africa was going to be further isolated, even on the African continent itself. Many of the frontline states even allowed the exiled ANC and Pan-African Congress to establish bases in their countries. From there, the ANC was able to step up raids into South Africa and intensify the armed struggle. It is without a doubt that with the assistance of the frontline states, the apartheid regime was plunged into a deeper crisis. And thus, under such immense international pressure, the apartheid state faced an insurmountable crisis. The anti-apartheid movement inspired boycotts, the sanctions and disinvestments campaigns, the Free Mandela campaigns, the role of the trade unions and support for the anti-apartheid struggle in Africa, were all able to effectively apply international pressure on the apartheid regime. South Africa was now hurting, both politically and economically, and was also isolated from the rest of the world as well. By the late 1980s, it became clear to many members of the ruling National Party in South Africa that they were going to be defeated. The end was inevitable. They now had to decide on how to prevent from losing everything, and this would lead to some members having secret negotiations with the ANC in the late 1980s. These secret negotiations would lead to the eventual collapse of apartheid by the end of the decade, and pave the way for official negotiations to begin during the 1990s. This will be covered in the next topic, which is topic 5 of your syllabus, the coming of democracy in South Africa. Thank you for watching this video, and as always, please remember to subscribe to the History Crew channel.